The smell of burnt metal and spilled whiskey hung in the air like a funeral shroud as Kira Chen pressed her bloodied palm against the warehouse wall. 3 bullets had shattered the windows above her head, and somewhere in the labyrinth of shipping containers, Marcus Blackwood was hunting her with the precision of a man who'd killed before. She'd come to Seattle's industrial district expecting a simple handoff. Instead, she'd walked into a trap that reeked of betrayal and old money corruption. The manila envelope in her jacket contained documents that could topple empires, and now, the heir to the Blackwood fortune wanted her dead for them. "I know you're bleeding," Marcus called out, his voice echoing off rusted steel walls. "That ricochet caught you good. Come out now, and I'll make it quick." Kira bit down on her lip to silence a grunt of pain. Blood seeped through her fingers, where shrapnel had torn into her palm. The warehouse stretched endlessly around them, filled with shadows and the skeletal remains of machinery that once powered half the city. Rain drummed against the metal roof like gunfire, masking her movements as she slipped between towering stacks of shipping containers. She'd been tracking the Blackwood family for 6 months, ever since her brother Danny had been found floating in Elliott Bay with his throat cut. The police called it a robbery gone wrong. Kira knew better. Danny had been investigating construction contracts that led straight back to Blackwood Industries, and someone had silenced him for it. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now running from the very man she'd come to destroy. "You killed my brother," she whispered into the darkness, testing her voice. It came out steadier than she felt. "Your brother was a liability," Marcus replied, from somewhere to her left. "Closer now, just like you." She could hear the calculated coldness in his tone. The same emotional void she'd witnessed in the boardroom footage her private investigator had obtained. Marcus Blackwood was a man who'd been carved from ice and ambition, inheriting a business empire built on blood and buried bodies. At 28, he was worth more than small countries, and he wielded that power like a scalpel. But Kira had secrets of her own. She pulled the ceramic knife from her boot, its weight familiar and comforting. Danny had taught her to fight dirty in the back alleys of Chinatown, long before she'd earned her law degree and learned to battle in courtrooms instead of streets.
Ow.
Tonight she'd need both skills. The sound of footsteps on metal grating made her freeze. Marcus was climbing the maintenance ladder to the upper level, trying to get a bird's-eye view of the warehouse floor. Smart, she'd have done the same thing. Moving silently through the maze of containers, she spotted a service elevator. At the far end of the building, if she could reach it without being seen, she might have a chance. The documents in her jacket were worth more than her life, but they were useless if she didn't survive to deliver them. She sprinted across an open stretch of concrete, her boots echoing despite her efforts to stay quiet. A gunshot rang out, and concrete exploded inches from her face. She dove behind a forklift, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Impressive," Marcus called out. "Most people would be crying by now." "Most people didn't grow up in my neighborhood," she shot back. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Danny Chen's sister. I should have seen the resemblance. He had the same stubborn streak. Did he beg before you killed him?" Another pause, longer this time. "He died protecting something. Someone, actually. Kept saying he had a sister who'd make us all pay." Marcus's voice was closer now, maybe 20 feet away. Turns out he was right. The admission hit her like a physical blow. Danny had died. Because of her, because he'd known she wouldn't stop hunting their father's killers. The documents she carried weren't just evidence of corruption. They were a roadmap to the conspiracy that had destroyed her family 15 years ago. She'd been 8 years old when their father, a construction worker, had tried to blow the whistle on safety violations that killed dozens. The Blackwood family had buried him under an avalanche of legal threats and manufactured evidence until he'd taken his own life rather than face prison. Danny had spent his adult life gathering proof, and now that burden belonged to her. "Tell me something, Kira," Marcus said, and she could hear him moving through the containers, getting closer. "What makes you think you're any different from the hundreds of people who've tried to take down my family?" She pressed her back against cold metal, gripping the knife tighter. "Because I have nothing left to lose. Everyone has something to lose, not me." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She had everything to lose. Her career, her freedom, her life. But admitting that would give him power over her, and she'd already surrendered too much. A shadow moved across the narrow gap between containers. Marcus was 3 rows over, methodically checking each hiding spot. In the dim light filtering through broken windows, she caught her first clear glimpse of him since the shooting started. He moved with the fluid grace of someone trained in violence, his expensive suit torn and stained, but still impeccably cut. Dark hair, sharp jawline, and eyes that seemed to catalog everything without revealing anything. He was exactly what she'd expected from the boardroom surveillance footage, except for one detail that made her stomach clench. He looked genuinely haunted. It was in the set of his shoulders, the way he held his gun, like it weighed more than it should. This wasn't a man who enjoyed killing. It was a man who'd learned to bury his conscience so deeply that only ghosts remained. That realization should have made her feel better. Instead, it made everything worse. She waited until he'd passed her hiding spot, then slipped out behind him. The ceramic knife was designed to be invisible to metal detectors, but it would cut through flesh and bone just as easily as steel. She'd practiced this move 1,000 times in her apartment, imagining the moment she'd finally face her family's killer. But as she raised the blade, Marcus spoke without turning around. "If you're going to do it quick. I'm tired of running from ghosts." The knife trembled in her grip. This wasn't how she'd imagined it would go. There was supposed to be rage, satisfaction, justice, not this hollow ache in her chest as she stared at the back of his neck. "Turn around," she whispered. He did, slowly, keeping his hands visible. The gun hung loose in his grip, pointed at the floor. Up close, she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of secrets that probably matched her own. "You're not what I expected," he said quietly. "Neither are you." They stood there in the rain-soaked darkness, 2 broken people connected by violence and loss. The knife felt impossibly heavy in her hand. The documents in her jacket crackled with every breath. "Your brother," Marcus said finally. "He didn't die because of the construction contracts." The words hit her like ice water. "What?" "That was just the surface. There's something bigger, something that goes back decades. The papers you're carrying are just the beginning." "Lying, am I?" He took a step closer, and she realized she was shaking. "Why do you think I'm here alone? Why do you think I let you get this far?" The implications crashed over her like a tide. If Marcus was telling the truth, then everything she'd believed about Danny's death was wrong. And if he was lying, then he was a better actor than she'd given him credit for. Either way, she was in deeper trouble than she'd imagined. The sound of sirens in the distance broke the spell between them. Marcus's head snapped toward the warehouse entrance, and she saw something like panic flash across his face. "They're not coming for you," he said grimly. "They're coming for both of us." Before she could ask what he meant, the warehouse doors exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The explosion threw Kira backward into Marcus, and for a moment they were tangled together against the shipping container, his body shielding her from the shower of metal debris. She could feel his heart racing against her back, smell the expensive cologne mixed with sweat and fear. "Move," he breathed against her ear, and they scrambled deeper into the maze of containers as tactical light swept through the smoke. "How many?" she whispered, still gripping the ceramic knife. "Too many." Marcus checked his weapon, face grim in the emergency lighting that had kicked on. "Private military. Which means someone with serious money wants us both dead." The irony of taking cover beside her brother's killer wasn't lost on her, but survival trumped revenge. At least temporarily, heavy boots echoed through the warehouse as the tactical team spread out in formation. Their voices carried the clipped efficiency of professionals who'd done this before. Kira counted at least 6 distinct speakers, all coordinating a systematic sweep that would find them within minutes. "There's a service tunnel beneath the loading dock," Marcus said quietly. "If we can reach it without being seen, we do." She turned to stare at him. 5 minutes ago, you were trying to kill me. 5 minutes ago, I thought you were working for them. Them who..." Before he could answer, a voice boomed through the warehouse, amplified by a megaphone. Marcus Blackwood. We know you're in there. Come out with the Chen woman and the documents, and we'll make this quick. Kira's blood turned to ice. They knew her name. More than that, they knew exactly why she was here. Your brother was getting too close, Marcus whispered, reading her expression. But he wasn't investigating construction contracts. He was investigating a conspiracy that's been running for 30 years. The same conspiracy that killed your father. The words hit her like a physical blow. My father killed himself. Your father was murdered. Made to look like suicide. Just like Danny was made to look like a robbery. Marcus's eyes were intense, desperate. The documents you're carrying prove it. All of it. She wanted to call him a liar, but the tactical team's presence suggested otherwise. If this was just about corporate corruption, why bring in military contractors? Why the coordinated hunt? For both of them? Target acquired. Northeast quadrant. A voice called out nearby. Marcus grabbed her wrist. Move now. They ran through the shadows between containers, keeping low and quiet. The service tunnel was 50 yards away across open ground. 50 yards that might as well have been 50 miles with trained killers hunting them. Why should I trust you? She hissed as they paused at the edge of cover. 'Cause I'm the only one who knows the whole truth. His jaw tightened. And because my father is the one who ordered yours killed? The admission hung between them like a blade. Kira felt something crack inside her chest, a sound like breaking glass. Then why are they trying to kill you too? Because I found out? Because I've been gathering evidence for 2 years, trying to find a way to bring him down without destroying myself in the process? Marcus's voice was raw with exhaustion. Your brother contacted me 6 months ago. He had pieces of the puzzle, but not enough to make it stick. We were supposed to meet the night he died. The implications crashed over her. Danny hadn't been working alone. He'd been working with the son of their father's killer, and somehow that partnership had gotten him murdered. The documents, she said slowly. What's really in them? Financial records. Offshore accounts? Payments to judges, politicians, police, commissioners. It's in a list of everyone who's died to keep the secret buried. His eyes met hers. 17 people over 30 years. Your father and brother were just the beginning. A tactical light swept across their hiding spot, and they pressed deeper into the shadows. The team was closing in, and they were running. Out of places to hide? The tunnel, Marcus said. It's our only chance. They broke cover together, sprinting across the open floor as shouts erupted behind them. Gunfire shattered the air, bullets sparking off concrete and metal. Kira felt one whip past her ear, close enough to part her hair. The loading dock was a raised platform that overlooked the service area. Marcus dove first, rolling as he hit the ground below. Kira followed, landing hard on her injured palm and biting back a scream. The service tunnel was hidden behind a maintenance panel that Marcus yanked open with desperate strength. Inside, narrow concrete walls stretched into darkness, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. Ladies first, he said. But there was no humor in it. She squeezed into the tunnel as boots thundered on the loading dock above them. The space was claustrophobic, filled with the smell of rust and stagnant water. Behind her, she could hear Marcus struggling to fit his broader shoulders through the opening. There's a grate about 50 yards ahead, he called softly. It leads to the storm drain system. So they crawled through absolute darkness, guided only by touch and sound. Water dripped somewhere ahead, and she could hear the distant rumble of traffic. Above ground, the tunnel felt like a tomb, and for a moment she wondered if they were just trading one death for another. Tell me about my father, she whispered as they moved. He was a good man who saw something he shouldn't have. Marcus's voice echoed strangely in the confined space. A building collapse that killed 12 people. He had evidence that my father's company had used substandard materials, bribed the inspectors. When he tried to go to the authorities, they offered him money to stay quiet. He refused. So they framed him for embezzlement, made it look like he'd been skimming from the union pension fund. Faced with prison and the knowledge that his family would be destroyed, he chose what he thought was the honorable way out. Kira's throat burned with unshed tears. Ash! She'd been 8 years old when she'd found her father's body, had spent 20, Years believing he'd been weak. Learning he'd died protecting his family changed everything. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" she asked. "Because I was a coward." The admission came out flat, matter of fact, because I benefited from the blood. Money, and I told myself I didn't know. Because I was afraid of losing everything I'd built. They reached the grate, and Marcus worked to pry it open. Beyond, she could see the wider storm drain and a sliver of gray daylight. "What changed?" she asked. He was quiet for so long, she thought. He wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I found out about the kids." "What kids?" "The ones who died in the building collapse. I found pictures of them in my father's files. School photos, family portraits. He kept them like trophies." The grate came loose with a grinding screech. One of them was 6 years old, same age as my nephew. They squeezed through into the storm drain, where the sound of their breathing echoed off curved walls. The water was ankle deep and moving slowly toward the harbor. Following it would take them away from the warehouse, but also deeper underground. You decided to bring him down. I decided to try. But I needed evidence that would stick, and I needed someone the authorities would believe. Someone with no connection to the family. He looked at her in the dim light. "Your brother was perfect. Clean record, law enforcement background, personal stake in the case, until he got too close and they killed him. Till someone figured out we were working together and decided to eliminate the threat. They waded through the storm drain in silence, each lost in their own thoughts." Kira's mind raced as she tried to process everything she'd learned. Her entire understanding of her family's tragedy had been rewritten in the space of an hour. But one thing still didn't make sense. If your father ordered the killings, why are his people trying to kill you? Marcus stopped walking. Out in the gray. Light filtering down from storm grates above, she could see conflict written across his face. "Because my father's been dead for 3 months," he said finally, "and whoever's running things now doesn't want any loose ends." Her like cold water. If Marcus's father was dead, then someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who knew about their partnership with Danny. Someone who wanted all the evidence buried along with everyone who'd seen it. "Who?" she whispered. "I don't know, but they've been cleaning house. 3 other potential witnesses have died in the past month. Car accidents, heart attacks, a robbery gone wrong." His eyes met hers. "We're not just running from killers, Kira. We're running from ghosts." Above them, she could hear vehicles moving through the streets, the sound of a search. Expanding beyond the warehouse, whoever was hunting them had resources and connections that went deeper than corporate corruption. "The documents," she said. "We can get them to the right people." "The police are compromised. Half the city council is on the payroll. The FBI might listen, but we'd have to survive long enough to reach them." They started walking again, following the storm drain toward the harbor. The water was getting deeper, and the current was stronger. Somewhere ahead, this tunnel would empty into Elliott Bay, the same waters where Danny's body had been found. "There's someone," Kira said slowly. "A federal prosecutor I knew in law school, Sarah Martinez. She's clean, and she owes me a favor."
I can't.
"You trust her? With my life?" "That's exactly what we're doing." They walked in silence for several minutes, the sound of water echoing around them. The tunnel was getting darker as they moved away from the storm grates, but ahead she could see a larger opening where this drain connected to the main sewer system. "Marcus," she said as they approached the junction, "why didn't you kill me back? There? When you had the chance?" He stopped walking and turned to face her. In the dim light, she could see exhaustion and something deeper in his expression. "Because when I looked at you, I saw everyone I'd failed to save. Your father, your brother, those kids in the building." He paused. "And because you're the first person in my entire life who's looked at me and seen a monster instead of a meal ticket." The honesty in his voice was devastating. For a moment, standing in the darkness beneath the city, she glimpsed the man he might have been if he'd been born into a different family. Someone who might have been worth saving. But before she could respond, the sound of voices echoed down the tunnel behind them. The tactical team had found the service entrance and we're following their trail through the underground. They're in the system, Marcus said grimly. We've got maybe 10 minutes before they catch up. They started running through the deeper water, splashing toward the main junction. But as they rounded the corner, Kira stopped dead. Standing in the larger tunnel, blocking their escape route, was a figure in expensive clothes pointing a gun directly at them. Someone she recognized from newspaper photos and charity galas. Margaret Blackwood, Marcus's mother. "Hello, son," she said calmly. "I think it's time you came home." Margaret Blackwood stood in the storm drain like a queen holding court, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the underground setting. She wore a black coat that probably cost more than most people's cars. She held the gun with the steady grip of someone who'd used it before. "Mother." Marcus's voice was carefully neutral, but Kira could feel the tension radiating from him. "I should have known." "Should you?" Margaret tilted her head, studying them both with calculating eyes. "I gave you every chance to walk away. Darling, every opportunity to choose family over this misguided crusade, like you gave Danny Chen a chance. Mr. Chen made his choice when he decided to blackmail us." Her tone was conversational, as if discussing the weather. "Just as you're making yours now," Kira found her voice. "You killed him. I protected my family. There's a difference." Margaret's gaze shifted to her, cold as winter. "Though I must admit, I'm impressed you made it this far. Your brother spoke about you quite a bit before he died." The casual cruelty of it hit Kira like a physical blow. This woman had tortured information out of Danny before killing him, had learned about his sister, his plans, his partnerships. "Construction scandal was just the surface," Kira said, pieces clicking together. "You've been running the whole operation since your husband died. Since long before that, actually." Margaret smiled, and it was worse than her coldness. "Richard was always too sentimental for this business, too concerned with legacy and honor. I've been cleaning up his messes for 30 years, including my father. Your father was going to cost us billions in lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny. 12 people died in that building collapse because of faulty materials. Yes. But thousands more would have lost their jobs if Blackwood Industries had been destroyed. I made a practical decision." Marcus stepped forward, putting himself slightly between Kira and his mother. "Practical. You murdered an innocent man and called it practical. I prevented a greater tragedy, the same way I'm preventing one now." Margaret's finger tightened on the trigger. "Give me the documents, Marcus. Both sets? Both sets?" Kira looked at him sharply, his jaw tightened. "She knows about the backup files." "What backup files?" "The ones your brother hid before our meeting. Insurance, in case something happened to the originals." Marcus's voice was heavy with guilt. "I should have told you." Another betrayal, another secret. Kira felt like she was drowning in them. "Where are they?" Margaret demanded. "Safe," Marcus replied. "Somewhere you'll never find them. I found Daniel Chen's copies easily enough. They're quite interesting reading. Financial records going back decades, witness statements, even some lovely photographs of crime scenes." Margaret's smile turned predatory. "Tell me, Miss Chen, did you know your brother spent his last 3 hours alive telling me exactly how proud he was of you?" Rage flooded through Kira like acid. Forward, but Marcus caught her arm. "That's what she wants," he murmured. "Don't give her the satisfaction." "How touching," Margaret observed. "The Blackwood heir protecting the daughter of one of our victims. Richard would have found it poetic." "Where is he?" Marcus asked suddenly. "Father's body." "What did you do with him?" "The same thing I did with Mr. Chen. Made it look like an accident." Margaret shrugged. Heart attacks are so common in men his age, especially after their sons disappoint them. The admission hung in the tunnel air like poison. Marcus had suspected his father's death wasn't natural, but hearing it confirmed by his own mother was a different kind of devastation entirely. "You killed your own husband." "I saved the company from his growing conscience. He was going to confess everything, destroy generations of work to ease his guilt over a few unfortunate deaths." Margaret's voice turned sharp. "Make the same mistake." Behind them, Kira could hear the tactical team getting closer, their voices echoing through the smaller tunnel. They were trapped between professional killers and a woman who'd murdered her own family. "The documents won't save you," Margaret continued. Even if you reach the authorities, who would believe such an outrageous conspiracy? Grieving sister. And a disturbed young man making wild accusations against one of the city's most prominent families? The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence can be explained away. Witnesses can be discredited. Money has a way of making inconvenient truths disappear. Margaret checked her watch with practiced calm. You have 30 seconds to decide. Give me the documents and walk away, or join your father and brother in whatever afterlife awaits martyrs. Kira felt the weight of the manila envelope against her chest. Inside were photocopies of financial records, witness statements, and a list of 17 names. 17 people who died to protect the Blackwood family's secrets, but she also carried something else, something she'd discovered in Danny's apartment after his death. It's hidden inside a hollowed-out law book, a USB drive containing bank records that went beyond what Marcus knew about. "I'll give you the papers," she said quietly. "Kira, no." Duh. Marcus turned to stare at her. "Those documents are the only leverage we have. Trust me." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because he nodded almost imperceptibly. She pulled out the manila envelope and held it toward Margaret. "Slide it over," the older woman instructed. Kira pushed the envelope across the wet concrete. Margaret picked it up without taking her eyes off them, then quickly flipped through the contents. "These are just copies. Originals are somewhere." "Safe. Where?" "Safe deposit box. Different bank, different city." Kira met her eyes steadily. "You'll never find it." Margaret studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "I don't need to find it, because you're going to retrieve it for me, like hell I am. But you are, because if you don't, I'll make sure. Your death is as slow and painful as your brother's was. And because I have something you want," nodded toward the tactical team behind them. "Bring him out." 2 soldiers emerged from the smaller tunnel, dragging a third figure between them. He was beaten and barely conscious, but Kira recognized him immediately. Thomas Chen, her uncle. It's the only family she had left. "Uncle Tommy," the words came out. "Strangled, Kira?" Thomas raised his head, blood running from a cut above his eye. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. They were waiting when I got home from work." "This is what happens when people don't cooperate with me," Margaret said pleasantly. "Your uncle has been telling me interesting stories about your family's history, about how your father kept detailed records of everything he witnessed, about how your brother inherited those records and spent years adding to them." Kira's mind raced. Her father had kept records. That's why Danny had been so confident about the case, why he'd reached out to Marcus in the first place. But if Margaret had Uncle Tommy, she might already know about the hiding place. "The safety deposit box," she said slowly, "doesn't exist." Your uncle was quite clear about that under questioning. Margaret gestured to one of the soldiers, who pressed his gun against Thomas's temple. "The real documents are hidden in your father's workshop, aren't they? The one your uncle has been maintaining as a shrine for 20 years. The workshop." Kira's heart sank. Her father's old workspace in the garage behind Uncle Tommy's house, filled with his tools and memorabilia. She'd avoided it since childhood, unable to face the reminders of what she'd lost. "How did you find out?" "Your brother was quite talkative once we explained the situation to him. Amazing what people will reveal to protect the ones they love." Margaret's smile was sharp as broken glass. "You have 24 hours to retrieve the documents and bring them to me. All of them, including whatever your brother added to the collection. And if I refuse, your uncle dies. Slowly. And then I hunt down every person you've ever cared about and do the same to them." Marcus stepped forward. "Let him go. Take me instead. I'm keeping you both." "Insurance?" "You might say," Margaret nodded to the soldiers. "Take Mr. Chen somewhere comfortable. Make sure he understands the consequences of his niece's cooperation." They dragged Thomas away, but not before he caught Kira's eye and mouthed something that made her blood freeze. The drive. He knew about the USB drive hidden in Danny's apartment. Somehow, he'd figured out what she was carrying. 24 hours, Margaret repeated. "And Miss Chen? Don't disappoint me the way your family has a habit of doing." She turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing off the tunnel walls until she disappeared into the darkness. The tactical team followed, leaving Kira and Marcus alone in the storm drain. For several minutes, neither spoke. The sound of water flowing toward the harbor filled the silence between them, carrying the weight of everything they'd learned. "I'm sorry," Marcus said finally. "About your uncle. Not all of it, are you?" She turned to face him, and he saw something different in her eyes. Something harder. "Or are you sorry you got caught in your mother's web? What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm wondering how much of this you actually knew. How convenient it was that you were there when I needed rescuing. How perfectly you played the role of reformed villain seeking redemption." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. "You think I'm working with her? I think your family has been manipulating people for 30 years. I think you're very good at telling people what they want to hear. I think it's awfully convenient that the only person who can verify your story is my dead brother. Kira, you have to believe me. I would never what? Lie to save your own skin? Sacrifice someone else to protect yourself?" Her voice was rising. "Your mother just told us she killed your father, and you're still breathing. Why do you think that is?" The question hung between them like a blade. Marcus stared at her, and she could see the exact moment he understood what she was implying. "You think she's keeping me alive because I'm useful to her? I think she's keeping you alive because you're still her son. And I think when the choice comes between saving me or saving yourself, you'll choose exactly what every Blackwood has always chosen." She started walking toward the harbor, following the flow of water toward whatever waited at the end of the tunnel. "Where are you going? To get my uncle back? With or without your help? You can't face her alone. She'll kill you, maybe. But at least I'll die knowing whose side I was really on." Marcus caught up to her as they reached the main outflow pipe. Beyond it, gray daylight filtered through a metal grate that opened onto the harbor. The water was deep enough here to swim in, and strong enough to carry them out to see if they weren't careful. "There's something else," he said quietly. "Something I didn't tell you about the backup files." She stopped walking, but didn't turn around. "Your brother didn't just hide copies of the evidence. He hid proof of something else, something that changes everything." "More lies? Proof that my mother isn't the only one involved in this. Proof that the conspiracy goes deeper than corporate or ATE, corruption, or even murder." His voice was barely audible above the sound of flowing water. "Proof that they've been trafficking children." The words hit her like ice water. She turned slowly to face him. "What? The building collapse that killed your father? It wasn't just about safety violations. The building was a front for a trafficking operation. 12 people died because my family was moving kids through there, and someone started asking questions." Kira felt the world tilt around her. Everything she'd thought she understood about her family's tragedy was wrong. Again, how many children? Hundreds. Maybe thousands over the years. All of it hidden behind legitimate construction projects and charity work. Marcus's face was pale in the dim light. "That's why they had to silence your father. Not just to protect the company, but to protect the operation." And Danny found out. Danny found everything. Financial records, shipping manifests, photographs. He was building a case that would have destroyed not just my family, but an entire network of people involved in the trafficking. The USB drive in her pocket felt like it was burning against her skin. If it contained proof of what Marcus was describing, it was worth more than both their lives combined. Who else knows? Besides my mother. I don't know. At the people hunting. Us tonight aren't just corporate security. We're part of something bigger. Something that has resources most governments would envy. Then why are you telling me this? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the gray water beyond. "The great? Because you asked me why she's keeping me alive," he said finally. "And the truth is, she isn't. She's planning to kill me too, once I've served my purpose. Which is getting you to retrieve those documents so she can destroy them. Then eliminating both of us as loose ends?" He met her eyes. "She told me as much when she was explaining how this was going to work." "When?" 3 days ago, when she had me arrange the meeting at the warehouse. The betrayal was like a knife between her ribs. "You set me up." "Yes." "You got my brother killed." "No, but I helped her get you into position to be killed." His voice was hollow. "I told myself I was protecting you by making sure it would be quick. I told myself a lot of things. Kira stared at him in the dim light, processing the magnitude of his confession. He'd been working with his mother all along, playing the role of reluctant ally while leading her straight into a trap. But he'd also saved her life in that warehouse. It turned against his own mother when the moment came to choose sides. "Why?" she whispered. "'Cause when I saw you standing there with that knife, ready to kill me for something I'd helped orchestrate, I realized what I'd become." He leaned against the tunnel wall, exhaustion written in every line of his body. "My whole life I told myself I was different from them, that I was building something clean with dirty money, but in the end, I was just another Blackwood trading. Lives for profit." The honesty in his voice was devastating. She wanted to hate him, to add his name to the list of people who'd destroyed her family. But looking at him now, broken and haunted, she saw something else. She saw herself if she'd been born into his world. "The trafficking operation," she said. "Is it still running, as far as I know?" The building collapse forced them to relocate. "But the network is still intact, still moving kids, still making money. Then we stop it." "With what?" "Your mother has the documents, she has your uncle, and she has an army of people willing to kill us to keep this quiet. She doesn't have everything." Kira pulled the USB drive from her pocket. Danny was smarter than she thought. Marcus stared at the small device. "What's on it?" "Bank records, shipping manifests, and a video Danny recorded 3 days before he died, explaining everything he'd discovered, including the trafficking, including names, dates, and locations. Enough evidence to bring down the entire operation." For the first time since they'd met, Marcus smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger and infinitely more human. "Then we have a chance." You could. Turn me in. Tell the authorities I was part of the conspiracy. Trade my confession for immunity. It would be the smart play. She considered it. Marcus had admitted to helping set her up, to being complicit in a plan that would have gotten her killed. Every measure of justice. He deserved to face the consequences of his choices. But justice and survival weren't always the same thing. "How do I know you won't betray me again? 'Cause I just told you the one thing that guarantees you'll never trust me. If I was still working with her, I would have kept lying until it was too late to matter." It was twisted logic, but it made sense. A man still playing both sides would never have revealed the depth of his betrayal. 24 hours, she said. "We have 24 hours to get my uncle back and expose this whole thing before your mother realizes what we're really planning. She'll be watching you. The moment you show up at your uncle's house, she'll know. Then we don't go to my uncle's house. We go somewhere she'd never think to look." "Where?" Kira smiled, and there was something predatory in it. "We go home. Your home was Danny's apartment. She's probably already searched it, not that home." She started wading toward the outflow grate. "The home where this all started. The place where my father hid the original evidence 30 years ago. I thought your uncle said the documents were in the workshop." "He did, 'cause that's what I told him to say if anyone ever came asking." She reached the grate and started working at the rusted bolts. "My father was paranoid after the first threats. He hid copies of everything in multiple locations, and he taught Danny and me where they were in case something happened to him." "You never told Danny about all of them. Never told anyone about all of them." "The first bolt came loose, including the location that has the master files. It's the ones that document not just the building collapse, but everything that came after." The grate swung open, and gray harbor light flooded the tunnel. Beyond, she could see fishing boats and cargo ships moving through Elliott Bay, the same waters where Danny's body had been found, where her father might have ended up if he'd chosen a different way to die. "Where?" Marcus asked, as they prepared to swim for shore. "The last place anyone would think to look for evidence against the Blackwood family." She slipped into the cold water, gasping at the shock of it. "Blackwood Industries headquarters." "That's impossible. The building is secured, monitored, full of people who work for my mother. Your father was paranoid too. He knew that someday his family might turn against him. So he created an insurance policy." She started swimming toward a maintenance ladder built into the harbor seawall, a safe room in the sub-basement that even Margaret doesn't know about. and that's where he hid the evidence that proves everything.
Ow.
Do you know about it? Because my father helped him build it? They reached the ladder and climbed out of the harbor, soaking wet and shivering in the gray Seattle morning. Above them, the city was waking up, oblivious to the war being fought in its shadows. We'll need to move fast, Kira said, wringing water from her hair. Your mother will expect me to spend time planning, gathering resources. She won't expect a direct assault on her stronghold. It's suicide. Even if we can get into the building, even if we find this safe room, how do we get the evidence out? How do we get your uncle back? One step at a time, she started walking toward the street. First, we get the proof. Then we use it to destroy her, and if we can't, Kira stopped walking and turned to face him. In the morning light, she looked. Older than her years, carved from the same hard stone as the city around them. Then we make sure she goes down with us. Asterisk, the Blackwood Industries Tower pierced the Seattle skyline like a steel and glass monument to power. It's 47 floors, reflecting the morning sun in brilliant blinding angles. Kira stood in the shadows of a parking garage across the street, studying the building where her father had once worked as a contractor, where he discovered the secrets that had destroyed their family. Beside her, Marcus checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. They'd spent the last 6 hours preparing for what felt like a suicide mission, gathering equipment and planning their route through a building he knew intimately and she'd never entered. Security shift change happens in 12 minutes, he said. Quietly, that gives us a 15-minute window to reach the service elevator before the new team settles in and your mother. Board meeting on the 32nd floor. Should keep her busy for at least an hour, he paused, lest she's expecting this. The possibility had occurred to Kira as well. Margaret Blackwood hadn't survived 30 years of criminal enterprise by underestimating her opponents. Right. But sometimes, the most audacious plan was the hardest to anticipate. The safe room, she said. Tell me again how to find it. Sub-basement level 3. Maintenance corridor behind the HVAC systems. Your father installed a hidden panel that looks like part of the air conditioning unit? Marcus's voice was tense. But Kira, if I'm wrong about this, if the room doesn't exist, or if my mother already found it. Then. We improvise. They crossed the street during the morning rush, just 2 more people in business attire heading to work. Kira had traded her torn clothes for a borrowed suit that made her look like any other lawyer or consultant visiting the tower. Marcus wore one of his own suits, retrieved from his penthouse apartment during a careful surveillance sweep. The lobby was all marble and steel, designed to intimidate visitors with its scale and opulence. Security guards in expensive uniforms watched from behind a polished desk, while business people moved through turnstiles controlled by key cards. Marcus nodded. To the guards with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. Morning, Dave, Sarah. Mr. Blackwood, the female guard replied. Didn't expect to see you in so early. Board prep. You know how it is. His smile was perfectly calibrated. This is Ms. Chen. She's consulting on the Henderson project. Kira kept her expression neutral. As the guard checked her fake ID, Marcus had produced it from sources she didn't want to think about, along with the key card that would get them past the turnstiles. Da. Conference room 7 is reserved for you, the guard said, handing back the ID. Perfect. Thanks, Sarah. They walked to the elevators, and Kira forced herself to breathe normally. So far, the deception was holding. But they weren't going to conference room 7. They weren't discussing the Henderson project. The elevator descended past the parking levels to the sub-basement, where the building's mechanical systems hummed behind unmarked doors. The air smelled of ozone and machine oil, and the fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows on concrete walls. This way, Marcus said, leading her through a maze of corridors lined with pipes and electrical conduits. They passed the building's main server room, its heavy door marked with biometric scanners and security cameras. Beyond that, the corridors became narrower, more utilitarian. This was the building's hidden infrastructure, the systems that kept 47 floors of corporate power running smoothly. There, Marcus pointed to an industrial air conditioning unit that looked identical to a dozen others they'd passed. If your father was right, the panel should be ... He ran his hands along the metal housing until something clicked. A section of the unit swung inward, revealing a narrow opening behind it. Jesus, he whispered. It's actually here. They squeezed through the opening into a small room lit by battery-powered emergency lighting. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, and a desk held an old computer that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. But it was the photographs on the walls that made Kira's breath catch. Dozens of pictures showing construction sites, building, plans and faces she recognized from news coverage of missing children. Her father had been documenting the trafficking operation for years before his death, building a case that went far beyond the building collapse that had finally given him the evidence he needed. My God, Marcus moved from cabinet to cabinet, pulling out files thick with photographs and documents. He documented everything: names, dates, financial transfers. This is enough to bring down not just my family, but everyone involved in the network. Kira found herself drawn to a particular photograph pinned to the wall. Showed a young girl, maybe 10 years old, standing next to a man in an expensive suit. The girl looked terrified. The man looked familiar. That's Senator Richardson, Marcus said, following her gaze. He's been pushing for relaxed immigration enforcement for years, because it makes it easier to move children without documentation. Other things. He pulled a thick file from one of the cabinets. Look at this. Shipping manifests showing containerized cargo moving through the port. Except the containers are listed as carrying construction materials, but they're actually carrying people, children specifically, ages 8 to 16, all from countries with weak governments and poor record keeping. The scope of it was overwhelming. What Kira had thought was a conspiracy to cover up corporate negligence was actually something far more monstrous. A systematic operation that had been destroying young lives for decades, all hidden behind the facade of legitimate business. Need to copy everything, she said, pulling out her phone. Photos, documents, anything that can be digitized. There's too much. It would take hours to document everything here. Then we take what we can carry and come back. There won't be a chance to come back. Once we leave here, my mother will know we found the room. She'll have it cleaned out within hours. Kira looked around the small space, calculating. The filing. Cabinets contained years of evidence, but most of it was organized by date and location. If she could identify the most recent files, the ones that documented current operations. Here, she said, pulling out a cabinet marked with the current year. These are the active cases, current locations, recent transactions. Marcus helped her pull files, stuffing documents into a backpack they'd brought for this purpose. Photos, financial records, correspondence between her father and others who'd been investigating the network. And then she found something that made her blood freeze. Marcus. Her voice was barely a whisper. Look at this. It was a shipping manifest dated 3 days ago, the same day Danny had died. It showed a container arriving at the Seattle port with a destination listed as Blackwood Facility 7. Facility 7 is the old warehouse district, Marcus said grimly. About 10 miles from where we met last night. How many? He checked the manifest. Details: 12. All listed as female, ages 10 to 14. They're there now? Probably. These operations don't usually hold cargo for long. Too risky. Kira felt something snap inside her chest. While she'd been running through storm drains and playing games with Marcus and his mother, 12 children had been sitting in a warehouse waiting to be sold to whoever had placed the orders. We have to get them. 8. We have to get your uncle. First, and we have to get this evidence to the authorities. There won't be time for both. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. Your mother expects me to show up with those documents in 18 hours. Gosh. If we try to rescue those kids. First, she'll kill Uncle Tommy. And if we don't try, those kids disappear forever. The choice was impossible. Save the children and lose her uncle, or save her uncle and condemn 12 young lives to whatever horror awaited them, unless... The USB drive, she said suddenly. What? About it? Danny's evidence. Contains proof of the trafficking network, right? Financial records, shipping manifests? Yes, but not as comprehensive as this. but enough to get federal attention, enough to trigger raids on known facilities. Eyes widened as he understood what she was thinking. You want to give them the drive while we handle the rescue ourselves? I want to split up. You take the evidence to the FBI. I go after the kids. Absolutely not. You can't handle a facility full of armed guards by yourself. You can't navigate federal bureaucracy while your mother is hunting us. Kira, this is insane. We need to work together. No, we need to save as many people as possible, and that means dividing our efforts. She handed him the USB drive, along with copies of the most critical documents from her father's files. Sarah Martinez, FBI field office downtown. Tell her Kira Chen sent you, and that this is connected to the Harbor View case she worked 3 years ago. She'll remember. That's the Harbor View case. The one that made her career. Missing children. Connected to Port Authority corruption. She's been looking for a break in the trafficking network ever since. Marcus pocketed the drive reluctantly. And you're going to assault a warehouse full of professional criminals by yourself? I'm going to do what Danny would have done. What my father should have been able to do. She pulled on the backpack full of evidence. I'm going to save those. Kids, you'll die maybe, but they'll live. For a moment, they stood in the small room surrounded by 30 years of carefully documented horror. Two people who'd been thrown together by tragedy, who'd found something like trust in the middle, of betrayal and violence. There's something else, Marcus said quietly. What? When my mother took him, she mentioned something about loose ends. I don't think she's planning to let him live, regardless of whether you cooperate. The words hit her. Like ice water. You're saying she's going to kill him anyway? I'm saying she's going to kill all of us anyway. The only question is how many people we can save first. Kira closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. Danny's death, her father's suicide, 30 years. Of children disappearing into a network of monsters wearing expensive suits. When she opened her eyes again, Marcus saw something different in them. Something that made him take a step back. Then we make sure she goes down fighting, she said. Left the safe room separately. Marcus took the main elevator to the lobby, while Kira used the service stairs to reach the parking garage. The plan was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. But as she walked through the shadows toward her borrowed car, Kira felt something she hadn't experienced since Danny's death. Purpose. She was done running, done hiding, done letting other people pay the price for her family's pursuit of justice. Tonight the war came to an end. One way or another, her phone buzzed as she reached the car. A text from an unknown number. Your uncle says hello. You have 16 hours. Don't disappoint me. Attached was a photo of Uncle Tommy tied to a chair in what looked like an abandoned building. He was alive. But the bruises on his face told her he wouldn't be for much longer. 16 hours. 12 children. One chance to make it right, Kira. Started the car and drove toward the warehouse district, leaving Marcus to handle the federal authorities. She'd kept one secret from him. One final card her father had taught her to play. The ceramic knife wasn't her only weapon. And mercy wasn't part of tonight's plan. The war was about to become very personal indeed. The warehouse crouched in the industrial district like a concrete predator, its broken windows staring blindly at the Seattle harbor. Kira watched from across the street as armed guards moved in practiced patterns around the perimeter. She counted. 6 visible sentries, which meant at least twice that many inside. Her phone showed 4 missed calls from Marcus. She'd ignored them all. This wasn't his fight anymore. The building matched her father's architectural drawings perfectly. Right down to the loading dock configuration and the placement of utility access points. He'd designed this place 30 years ago, back when he'd still believed the Blackwood family was legitimate. Before he'd learned what cargo would really move through these doors. Now his daughter was going to burn it down. She'd spent the last 3 hours preparing. Gathering supplies from contacts Danny had cultivated during his investigation. Explosives weren't hard to find in a port city, especially if you knew which dock workers had flexible ethics and pressing debts. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Create multiple distractions to draw the guards away from the central holding area, then extract the children during the confusion. The evidence her father had collected included detailed blueprints showing exactly where prisoners would be kept. What the plan didn't account for was survival. Kira had made peace with that hours ago. Her secure phone buzzed. Marcus again. FBI is moving on 3 other locations, the text read. Your contact came through. They need 48 hours too. Corday, you can't do this alone, she typed back quickly. Already started. Get my uncle. End this. Then she turned off the phone. The first explosion took out the guard station at the main entrance. Carefully placed charge that destroyed equipment, but sent the guards running for cover rather than killing them outright. Kira wasn't interested in murdering working-class men. We probably didn't know the full scope of what they were protecting. The second explosion followed 30 seconds later, collapsing part of the loading dock and triggering every alarm in the building. Guards poured out of hidden positions, shouting instructions and coordinating response to what looked like a coordinated assault by a large force. In reality, it was one woman with her father's blueprints and enough plastique to level a city block. She waited until the perimeter guards had moved toward the main disturbance, then slipped through a utility access panel her father had designed as a maintenance entrance. The narrow tunnel led directly beneath the building's central holding area, merging behind a false wall that looked like part of the structural support. The sounds that greeted her were worse than anything she'd imagined. Children's voices, crying and calling out in languages she didn't recognize. The harsh commands of guards speaking English with various accents. The industrial hum of machinery that suggested this place processed more than just human cargo. She emerged from the tunnel into a storage area filled with shipping containers. Some closed and locked, others standing open to reveal cramped living spaces designed for maximum efficiency rather than human comfort. The smell was overwhelming, a mixture of unwashed bodies, industrial disinfectant, something else she didn't want to identify. Building 7, what's your status? A radio crackled nearby. Under control. Looks like someone wanted to make noise, not actually breach the facility. The voice was coming from around the corner, where the main holding area opened onto the shipping floor. Kira pulled out the ceramic knife, its weight familiar and comforting in her hand. She'd practiced this move 10,000 times since Danny's death. Quick, silent, efficient. The guard never saw her coming. The holding area contained 12 shipping containers arranged in 2 rows, each modified with ventilation holes and basic sanitation facilities. Through the air holes, she could see faces. Pressed against the metal, young eyes wide with fear and desperate hope. It's okay, she whispered in English, then repeated it in Spanish and what she hoped was recognizable Chinese. I'm getting you out. The container locks were industrial grade, but not sophisticated.
Ow.
Her father had taught her to pick locks during their weekend fishing trips, back when he'd still believed she might need practical skills to survive in a world that wasn't always fair to people like them. He'd been right. Just not in the way either of them had expected. The first container opened to reveal 3 girls, ages ranging from what looked like 10 to maybe 14. They were dirty and terrified, but they moved when she gestured for them to follow. Second container held 2 boys and a girl, all clutching each other like they were afraid to let go. English, she asked quietly. One of the older girls nodded hesitantly. My name is Kira. I'm here to help. We need to move quickly and quietly. Can you help me with the others? The girl translated rapidly in what sounded like Vietnamese. And suddenly all 6 children were moving with purpose instead of terror. Understood rescue when they saw it. The next containers yielded 6 more children, bringing the total to exactly 12, just as the shipping manifest had indicated. All appeared to be in reasonably good physical condition, though the psychological damage would take years to heal. If any of them lived through the next 20 minutes? This way, Kira whispered, leading them back toward the maintenance tunnel. That's when the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red that made the warehouse look like a vision of hell, somewhere above them. She could hear boots on metal grating and voices, coordinating a systematic search. They'd figured out the explosions were a diversion. Stay together, she told the children. No matter what happens, stay together. But as they reached the tunnel entrance, figures emerged from the shadows. 6 men in tactical gear, moving with the coordinated precision of a military unit. Professional. Kidnappers who'd realized their cargo was being liberated. "Drop the knife," the lead man said in accented English. "Step away from the merchandise." Merchandise. The word hit her like acid. These weren't people to these men, they were products. To be bought and sold and used until they broke? "The merchandise is leaving with me," she replied calmly. "No, they're not." Hey. The tactical team spread out in a standard formation designed to prevent exactly what Kira was attempting. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed she was trying to escape. Instead, she handed the ceramic knife to the oldest girl and pulled out what looked like a modified cell phone. "You have 30 seconds to get these children out of this building before I bring the whole thing down on top of us," she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You're bluffing, am I?" She held up the device so they could see the display. "My father designed this building. I know exactly where to place charges for maximum structural damage. The explosions you heard earlier were just the appetizer. You'll die too, yes, but they'll live. That's what matters." For a moment, nobody moved. The tactical team exchanged glances, calculating odds, and trying to determine if she was serious. Then one of the younger children, a boy who couldn't have been more than 10, stepped forward and took her free hand. "We stay with you," he said in heavily accented English. "We all stay together." The other children moved closer, forming a protective circle around her. They'd spent days or weeks being treated like animals, but they recognized courage when they saw it, and they chose to stand with someone willing to die for them, rather than live with people who'd bought and sold them. "Stand down." A new voice called from the shadows. Margaret Blackwood emerged from behind one of the shipping containers, flanked by 2 more guards. She wore the same expensive coat from the storm drain. But now there were bloodstains on the fabric that hadn't been there before. "Mother." Marcus stepped out from behind another container, his hands zip-tied behind his back and a gun pressed against his head. "Glad you could join us." Kira felt her heart sink. He'd been captured trying to reach the FBI, and now they were. Both trapped in a warehouse full of people who wanted them dead? "I must admit, Miss Chen, you've been far more resourceful than I anticipated." "Hey." Margaret's voice echoed strangely in the cavernous space. "Dividing your forces, creating multiple distractions, even finding your way into the building through routes I didn't know existed. Let the children go. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with anyone who threatens my family's business. Unfortunately, that now includes my son." She nodded to one of her guards, who struck Marcus across the face with the butt of his pistol. Blood ran from his nose as he struggled to stay conscious. "See, Miss Chen, Marcus made a critical error. He actually delivered your evidence, too. The authorities, just as you planned. Unfortunately, he also confessed to his own involvement in the conspiracy, because it was the right thing to do, because it was the weak thing to do. And weakness has never been tolerated in this family." Pulled out a pistol of her own, pointing it not at Kira or the children, but at her own son. "I'm going to give you a choice, Miss Chen. You can die quickly and quietly, and I'll make sure these children are sold to families who will treat them well. Or you can continue this futile resistance, and I'll kill my son in front of you before turning you all over to buyers who specialize in disciplining difficult merchandise." The threat hung in the air like poison. Around her, Kira could feel the children pressing closer, trusting her to find a way out of an impossible situation. But there was one thing. Margaret didn't know about her father's architectural work. One detail that hadn't made it into the official blueprints because it had been added after the building's completion. "There's a third option," Kira said quietly, "which is, no? You let everyone go and I give you what you really want." "And what might that be?" Kira reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a garage door opener. It found it in her father's safe room, attached to a note that simply read, "Insurance." "My father didn't just design this building, he also designed its destruction." Margaret's eyes widened as she recognized what Kira was holding. The support charges. They're still active after 30 years. "My father was a thorough man. He believed in redundancy." Kira's finger hovered over the single button on the device. One push, and this entire building comes down in 45 seconds. Long enough for everyone to get out if they run. Not long enough to stop me if you try. You're insane. I'm my father's daughter. The standoff stretched for an eternity that lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then Marcus spoke from where he knelt bleeding. She's not bluffing, Mother. Her father designed fail-safes into every building he worked on after the Harbor View collapse. He was obsessed with structural integrity. Shut up, he knew someday. You'd use his buildings for exactly this kind of thing. So he made sure there was always a way to bring them down if necessary. Margaret's face went through a series of expressions, from anger to calculation to something that might have been fear. If you destroy this building, you'll never find your uncle. Actually, a familiar voice called from the loading dock entrance. He's already been found. Thomas Chen limped into the warehouse, supported by 2 FBI agents and followed by what looked like half the Seattle Police Department. His face was bruised and swollen, but he was alive and conscious and very, very angry. "Hello, sweetheart," he called to Kira. "Sorry we're late. Traffic was terrible." The tactical team scattered like roaches when the lights came on, but they didn't get far. FBI agents swarmed through every entrance. Surrounding the building with enough firepower to level city blocks, Margaret Blackwood stood frozen in the middle of it all, her pistol still pointed at her son, her empire crumbling around her like the building she'd just threatened to destroy. "Mrs. Blackwood," one of the FBI agents said calmly, "please drop your weapon and place your hands behind your head." "This isn't over." "Yes," Kira said, still holding the detonator. "It is." For a moment, mother and son looked at each other across the warehouse floor. 30 years of secrets and lies and blood money coming to an end in a building designed by the first man Margaret had killed. Then Marcus spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence, "I'm sorry, Mother, for all of it." Margaret's face crumpled, and for just an instant, she looked like what she was, an old woman who'd traded her soul for power and found herself alone at the end with nothing but enemies and a son who could finally see her for what she'd become. She dropped the gun. The FBI moved in with practiced efficiency, separating suspects and securing evidence. The children were taken into protective custody by agents specially trained in human trafficking cases. Uncle Tommy was whisked away to a hospital, but not before giving Kira a hug that nearly broke her ribs. And in the middle of it all, Kira finally allowed herself to put down the detonator and breathe. Marcus found her an hour later, sitting on the running board of an ambulance while a paramedic cleaned the cuts on her hands. His nose was broken and one eye was swelling shut, but he was alive and free and something like at peace. "How many facilities did they hit?" she asked. 7. The evidence your father collected led them to trafficking operations in 4 states. He sat down beside her, wincing at the movement. "They estimate over 100 children rescued tonight. And the adults? 43 arrests so far, including 2 senators and a federal judge. The conspiracy goes deeper than we thought, but it's over now." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the organized chaos of a major federal operation. Crime scene techs photographed everything, while FBI agents interviewed witnesses and suspects. The warehouse that had been a monument to human misery was becoming evidence in the largest trafficking prosecution in Pacific Northwest history. "What happens now?" Kira asked. "Trials, testimony, years of legal proceedings." Marcus looked out. At the harbor, where the morning sun was beginning to rise over Elliott Bay, and hopefully some kind of justice for the people who didn't make it this far. "Your mother will spend the rest of her life in prison, assuming someone doesn't kill her first. She made a lot of enemies over the years, and you are testifying. For the prosecution, in exchange for reduced charges, it's probably 5 to 7 years, with parole, possible after 3 if I cooperate fully." It wasn't justice in the purest sense. Marcus had been complicit in crimes that destroyed lives, had helped his family maintain their power through violence and corruption. But he'd also turned against everything he'd been raised to believe, had risked his life to help bring down. The conspiracy that had killed her father and brother. Sometimes justice wasn't about perfect outcomes. Sometimes it was about broken people trying to do better than they'd been taught. "I'll testify for you," she said quietly. "At the sentencing hearing?" "You don't have to do that?" "Yes, I do." You could have let me die in that warehouse. Could have saved yourself and walked away clean. But you chose to stand with the victims instead of the victimizers. It was the least I could do. It was everything you could do. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the FBI agents process evidence that would destroy dozens of lives and maybe save hundreds more. Your father would be proud, he said finally. So would yours. How can you say that? He was part of this from the beginning. He was scared and made terrible choices. But he also taught his son to recognize evil when he saw it and to fight it even when the cost was everything he'd built. She looked at him, this complicated man who'd been both her enemy and her salvation. That's worth something. The sun was fully up now, painting the harbor in shades of gold and silver. Somewhere in the distance, ships carried legitimate cargo to legitimate destinations. Children went to school instead of auction blocks. The world continued turning, a little cleaner for the blood they'd spilled to wash it. What will you do now? Marcus asked. Go home. Bury my brother properly. Maybe try to practice law again. Help other families who've been hurt by people like your mother. And after that, I don't know. But for the first time in 20 years, I'm not running from ghosts. They watched the last of the evidence being loaded into FBI trucks. The final chapter of a story that had begun with a construction worker who'd seen too much and refused to stay silent. The warehouse would be demolished within weeks. The ground cleaned and prepared for something. It would serve the city instead of preying on it. But the real monument to her father's memory wouldn't be built from steel, concrete. It would be built from the lives saved, the children rescued, the families reunited with missing daughters and sons. There's something else, Marcus said as they prepared to leave. Something I found in my father's files that you should know about. What? Your father didn't kill himself. The words hit her like ice water. What are you talking about? I found his body. I read the note. The note was real, but he didn't write it voluntarily. Marcus pulled out a folder from inside his jacket. My father kept recordings of everything, including the night your father died. Insurance, he called it. Proof that he could destroy anyone who tried to destroy him. Recordings of what? The interrogation. They tortured him for hours, trying to get him to reveal where he'd hidden the evidence. When he finally broke, when he told them about the safe room and the backup files, they forced him to write the suicide note at gunpoint. Kira felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, like bones settling after a long healing. The father she remembered, the man who'd taught her to fight for what was right no matter the cost, had never betrayed his principles. He'd died, protecting them. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know the truth. Because someone should remember him as he really was, not as they tried to make him appear. She took the folder, feeling the weight of 30 years of lies finally lifting from her shoulders. Her father had been a hero, a flawed, frightened, ultimately courageous man who died trying to save children he'd never met from monsters wearing expensive suits. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance to be better than what I was born to be. An FBI agent approached them, tablet in hand, in the look of someone with many more questions to ask. The formal process was just beginning, but the war was over, as they stood to leave. Kira caught sight of something that made her heart skip. Through the warehouse windows, she could see the Seattle skyline rising against the morning sky. Somewhere out there, Uncle Tommy was recovering in a hospital bed. Somewhere else, a dozen rescued children were beginning the long process of healing and finding their way home. And somewhere in the city morgue, Danny's body was finally going to receive the justice he died seeking. One more thing, she said to Marcus, as they walked toward their respective federal escorts. Yeah, when you get out of prison, look me up. I might have some cases that could use someone who understands how the other half lives. He smiled, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. I'd like that. 3 years later, Marcus Blackwood walked out of federal prison into a Seattle morning that looked remarkably similar to the one that had ended their war against his family's legacy. The same harbor, the same skyline, the same sense of possibility. That came with surviving something that should have destroyed you. Kira was waiting for him at the prison gates. leaning against a car that had seen better decades but still ran well enough to get them where they were going. "Punctual as always," she said as he approached. "Learned it from the guards. They're very strict about schedules." She handed him a folder thick with legal documents. Chen and Associates could use a partner who understands corporate corruption. From the inside, the pay is terrible, the hours are worse, and most of our clients can't afford to pay us properly. Sounds perfect. There's one condition, which is we start with this case. She showed him a photograph of a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, Maria Santos. Disappeared 6 months ago from a foster home in Tacoma. Local police think she's a runaway, but her caseworker thinks differently. Marcus studied the photo, seeing something familiar in the girl's frightened eyes. "You think it's connected to trafficking?" "I know it is. The foster home has connections to a company that does contract work for shipping firms. Same pattern we've seen before, just smaller scale. How many others?" "At least 6 in the past year. All from the same network of foster homes, all officially classified as runaways." He handed back the photo and looked at her seriously. "This could be dangerous. If there's still an active network operating, then we shut it down, just like we did before. We're not the same people we were 3 years ago." "No," she agreed. "We're better." They got in the car and drove toward downtown Seattle, where a small law office waited for them in a building that had seen better decades. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, but it was clean and honest and dedicated to fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. On the wall behind Kira's desk hung a photograph of Danny Chen in his police uniform, smiling the way he used to smile when he thought he was about to solve a case that would make a difference. Next to it was a photo of their father, taken on a construction site years before the world had taught him that good men sometimes die for doing the right thing. And below both pictures, in a frame that had been carefully repaired after suffering damage in a warehouse explosion, was the letter Danny had written to Kira the night before he died. "If you're reading this," it said, "then I didn't make it home. But that doesn't mean the work is finished. Find Marcus Blackwood. He has pieces of the puzzle I couldn't get. Trust him, but verify everything. And remember, sis, sometimes the best way to honor the dead is to save the living." Marcus read the letter while Kira made coffee in the small office kitchen. When she returned, he was staring out the window at the Seattle harbor, where container ships moved legitimate cargo. 2 legitimate destinations under the watchful eyes of authorities who now knew what to look for. "Ready to get started?" she asked. "More than ready." They spread the Maria Santos's case files across the conference table that had once belonged to their father, in an office that had once been a storage closet, planning their first official case. As Chen and Associates outside, the city continued its ancient work of commerce and corruption, hope and heartbreak. People trying to build better lives while other people tried to profit from their desperation. But in one small office, 2 people who'd learned that justice sometimes comes with a terrible price were preparing to pay it again, as many times as necessary for as long as it took. The war never really ended. It just moved to new battlefields. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very stubborn and willing to sacrifice everything that mattered, you won enough battles to make the whole thing worthwhile. 3 blocks away, in a foster home that processed children like inventory, a little girl named Maria Santos sat by a window and watched the harbor, waiting for someone to remember that she existed. She didn't have long to wait. The end asterisk. Like this video if the story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love, and let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.